for now, we're going to talk about DevOps, the three pillars of DevOps, and we have one of the world's leading authorities, a man who wrote the book on DevOps, Andy Mann. Thanks,
Roger, friend. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I know it's late. We're going to try and keep this a little bit lively. My name's Andy Mann. My company is called Sageable. That doesn't really matter, though. I'd like to introduce our guests. So, firstly, a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So, DevOps is a cultural phenomenon. It's a philosophy. It's a movement. We hear a lot about how it's a cultural change, but to me, culture is an output, not an input. So, what do you have to do to make that cultural change? And I think it's about people, and it's about process, and it's about technology. We hear about these three pillars all the time in what we do. So in this power panel, and this is a power panel, we're going to talk about those three pillars. We're going to try and figure out what best practices exist within people, process, technology, where to focus, where some of the problems and gaps might arise. And especially, how we can build the structures, the processes, the technologies to be able to drive this new DevOps culture. So I'll let our speakers introduce themselves, but first I'll just give you a quick intro. Starting on, I've messed up the seating, haven't I?
Start here.
I'll start at the far end. At the far end, Dalibor Soroki is the director and co-founder of Plutora. They've got a booth outside. Please go and visit them tomorrow. In the middle here, we have Shannon Williams. He's the co-founder at Rancher Labs. They also have a booth out there, I believe. So go visit them tomorrow as well. And right here on my left, Haseeb Budhani. So Budhani, I'll get that right eventually, mate, is the co-founder and CEO of Sohar. Do you have a booth there?
Yes, we do.
Fantastic. It's an all play. So firstly, I'm just going to ask each of my panelists to give them a little bit of an introduction to themselves, what they do, what their company does. So I'll start here.
Sure. So my name is Haseeb Budhani. I'm part of a company called Sohar Systems. So we provide security as a service. The intent and the goal here is not to kind of share about our company, but the intent is instead of you spending time building security around your applications, whether that be in a public cloud or a private cloud, you can consume security, a number of pieces in security as a service. And my point of view on DevOps, since we're on a DevOps panel, is we are a consumer of DevOps. We're not selling a DevOps technology per se, but without DevOps being kind of part and parcel of our company, there's not a chance in hell we can actually sell our service. Because our customers, the way they react, to the way they ask us questions, the way they want more things, the way we need to be just up all the time watching, making sure our service is up to date, etc. If we were not a DevOps organization, it's just never going to work out. So we are, we have lived it for the last 2 years, and obviously happy to share what we've learned in the last 2 years.
Super. So we actually have a practitioner of DevOps on stage as well. So think about what you might want to ask him. We'll be doing Q&A as well. Shannon, tell us a little bit about your business and what you do.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. So my name's Shannon Williams, and I'm one of the founders of Rancher Labs. We are a pretty new software company. We started the company in last September, and we do infrastructure technology for cloud, for containers. And it means we work a lot with Docker. We work a lot with companies that are implementing Docker and cloud computing, and that means we work a lot with DevOps teams. So most of our time is spent working with DevOps organizations on how they think about the build process, how they think about immutable objects, moving their infrastructure to the cloud, beginning to kind of design applications for the cloud. And before that, I was a founder at a place called Cloud.com, which was an early provider of a product called CloudStack, which is an infrastructure as a service software. And in that role, I worked with a lot of companies who built private clouds and really sometimes struggled with the process of moving organizations that were really not very DevOps focused to consuming cloud computing, where organizations are very siloed. They struggled a lot of times to understand the different roles and processes that people needed to take on in order to leverage the clouds that they had very efficiently. So really interested in the panel, excited to talk about that and some of the challenges I've seen over the years.
Excellent, super, thank you. And last but definitely not least, Dalibor, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. Dalibor Soroki, I work for a company called Plutora. I'm the co-founder. We are an enterprise release and test environment management service provider. We essentially have a collaboration and orchestration platform that helps companies, particularly large enterprises, release software faster and with greater quality. So my background prior to that was working in large enterprises, CIO of an investment banking division, so I understand the intricacies, the regulatory requirements, all the other constraints that are imposed on environments like the enterprise where you're trying to do things faster and at higher quality. So.
Excellent. And I just would like to add, it's great to have at least one person on this panel who has the proper kind of accent.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to
Shannon.
definitely talking about Shannon. Okay. So I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. I've got a bunch of questions here, but there's, you people have been in these audiences and you've been walking around the booths and stuff. I'm sure you've got questions as well. So think about what you might like to ask our panel. They are experts in their field. And I'll be pausing halfway through or so to see if there are any questions and take them from the audience. In the meantime, I'm going to start with one of my own questions. It's a little bit loaded. Talibor, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
What's more important in DevOps, people, process, or technology?
Well, you've got to have technology and you've got to buy Plutora, but fundamentally it comes down to...
Good shameless plug. I always love a good shameless plug.
Fundamentally it comes down to the people. I think in any of that question, you can almost think of that as a pyramid, that they're all equally important. I'm realistic when I say you can't do it without the tooling because you do need that hard-to-do automation without tooling, but the reality is it comes down to the people, making sure that you've got the best teams, but not only that you've got the right collaborative culture within the organisation to support those teams working together. So whether it's the development team, the project management office in an enterprise, or the service management team, making sure that they work together and the culture is not defined by conflict, but rather by collaboration.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned the PMO.
Yeah.
Now, this is interesting, right?
Dirty word, right?
It's a bit of a dirty word to some people, that's for sure. We think about DevOps very much in terms of what we call the unicorns, right? Small organizations, very agile, very nimble. I wonder if, does Netflix have a PMO? I don't know. Zynga, Etsy, do they have a PMO? This is an enterprise question. What's different about the enterprise? And I know, Talibor, I know some of your customers, Shannon, Hasib, you've got some big customers, enterprise customers. Is DevOps different for larger enterprise? Shannon, maybe we can start with you. Is it different for large enterprise?
I think it's dramatically different. I mean, I think it's dramatically more difficult to implement in the enterprise to take and do DevOps because, when you're a smaller organization, and I think it's true for us and for most of the customers I've worked over the years, or, when you hear about these unicorns that are Netflix and Etsy and stuff, they have single-minded focus. You have a focus towards, very specific business. Usually it's a more tightly focused business, right? Netflix has a very tightly focused business. Etsy has a tightly focused business. When you're talking about Kaiser, or somebody who's talking about Kaiser, they don't have a tightly focused business. They have a business that has 70 years of legacy and history and, divisions that are really important, some divisions that aren't very important, projects that are important, projects that aren't important. And so, everything comes down to, really setting expectations at some level that results have to be achieved at the technology level before DevOps can get off the ground. And, I found that, so often in some of the cloud projects we've worked on over the years, private cloud projects, the IT or the CIO has gone out and said, we're going to build this really amazing system and we're going to put it in place. And we want to teach everyone how to do DevOps. And it really has failed most of the time miserably because you can't teach people DevOps. They have to own, you have to change the ownership. It's a reorg that has to happen at some level. You have to allocate ownership away from, say, the ops team to a more, integrated team. And when that happens, all of a sudden, ownership drives behavior, and that leads to new sets of processes, leads to new sets of tools that you start to embed. But without ownership, I don't think you ever get, and I think in the enterprise it's much harder for people aren't willing to take ownership as much, and the systems, the company isn't willing to give out ownership or responsibilities as much, and so it's a lot harder, it's much more different.
May I ask a question?
Please.
So, sorry. What do you think about the case where, let's say you said Kaiser, right? So Kaiser is a big company, they do many, many things. But let's take the example of their website. Do you think it would make sense for them to say, for this website, I'm making up an example, we're going to run this as a DevOps shop. But my desktops, we both come from Citrix. So for my desktops, which is all Citrix, that's not going to be, there's just no chance in hell that's going to be DevOps. Do you think that works? Do you think that's something that makes more sense for an enterprise?
I think it certainly is what's happening. I mean, that's exactly what I see happening, is that, It's you're not creating a herd of unicorns. You're finding teams that decide,
Right.
we own this responsibility. We are going to make an exceptional user experience, and we're going to change the way we work. And it spreads. I do believe that it's contagious once it happens. And so if I'm CIO of an investment banking division, I don't try to implement DevOps across the board and define my organization as a DevOps organization. I try to task teams that are responsible for applications. I find ways to make them work together, put them in the same physical locations as much as possible, and have them collectively own the outcome. And the only metric I care about is higher level metrics. I push my metrics up. Don't tell me about the availability of some given service. Tell me about the end user experience, consistently. And that spreads. I mean, I agree with you. Things like Citrix may never move. Desktop services, they're not going to move to DevOps. But I do think that even in places like that, you do start to see, the ops organizations letting go of some of the control. And I think that's where I think the CIO has a big role to play, is to sort of change the hat, because the hat has been control, right? Control leads to everything. Control is key. And as long as ops continues to have that mantra, then developers just are happy to blame them when everything goes wrong, right? You wanted control, fine, you own it. You're responsible. And so I do think that as a CIO, you can set your organization up to be more DevOps friendly and just let your company, but the ownership has to happen on a project by project, app by app basis.
Yeah. I mean, I turn the question back on you. What do you think about that? Do you think because there's a lot of discussion, and this touches on the ideas of bimodal IT, the idea that part of your organization can be legacy and do what it did, but you move the new stuff, maybe your website, mobile device, stuff like that, you move that into the new DevOps approach. And that's controversial. Gartner advocate for bimodal IT, but a lot of people talk about how, well, who the hell wants to be the COBOL guy at a modern development shop, right? So, I mean, how would you answer your own question, I guess?
So if we were a bimodal, so anybody in our organization who wanted to be the bimodal guy, he would not last, right? I mean, I think very similar to the companies that John was talking about.
Not doing a lot of COBOL mainframe stuff yourself, no? Okay.
I'll give you guys an example. So when we were starting the company, we were interviewing people. And one of the questions one statement I would make to everybody, and this was designed to be a provocative statement, was, okay, so we're going to have an alpha in 3 months, a beta in 6 months, and in 9 months I want to have a product out. And a lot of people would say, well, how is this possible? We need a year, and they need to plan, and I need to write my documentation. You're not the right guy for our company, because the world is changing. We need to move a lot faster. I think, given how we do things, and as an example, we probably do 7, 8 drops in production a month. Easy, 7, 8 drops in production a month. And small different things. Funnily enough, we were doing a demo this morning at our booth, and our technical marketing guy and I, we saw this new page in our UI for the first time. We'd never seen it before. It happened 2 nights ago. That's how it needs to be. So there's a certain kind of person, going back to Dalibor's point, there's a certain kind of person who fits in it. There's a certain kind of person who does not. And that's okay. Right? There are needs for all kinds of audiences out there, but particularly when it comes to DevOps, the mentality has to be, look, this organization has a singular purpose. We need to solve a certain problem for a certain customer. Now, customers could be people paying you money or an internal user, it doesn't matter. But you have a customer, and they have a need, and they need you to be up on your game. They need you to fix things on the fly. And if you don't have that mentality where you can run things 24/7, so for us, we have a team in California, we have a team in India, and then we have a small cadre in Australia as well. So we have 3 locations where people are doing stuff on Slack, and this is happening 24/7. If you don't have that mentality, you're not going to survive. And I think that is just, I mean, it's a very harsh thing to say, but it's just very different. I mean, even for me, coming to a company like this where we resell a service, coming from a box environment, it was a massive, I had to rewire my brain. But if you don't, you're never going to last here.
Just kind of turning back questions on you. I think
going to keep talking to each other here.
Exactly. We're just going to keep the conversation here. When you made that shift and you were looking for the right kinds of people, we go through this as well, finding people that can sort of appreciate the speed. But going back to like the packaged software, like most people's there's a 20% or 30%, maybe 70% of their software they run are packaged software applications that come to people. How do you think they should approach DevOps? I mean, how can they take DevOps and apply it to something, like SAP, or like, maybe SAP is a bad example because it's so customized. Let's pick, something
Oracle?
else there. Yeah, Oracle,
Same
like
thing.
worse. Some packaged application.
So I think, so when we go interact with the customer, I think that's the best way to describe this. So I'll make up an example. So let's say we have a customer who wants their Oracle e-business suite application to be exposed to some guys out there. Now, what are the steps towards that? Right? So first I need to get an app up and running in a dev environment. I need to test it. I need testers who test this right things, which means I need to give testers access. And then once that is done, I need to go to a DevOps place, and then I need to do the next thing on staging. And then I go production, and then I go talk to security, which is a 2-month project. Right? So if you look at every step in the process, and I'm talking about packaged software, right? Developing is different. At every step, I think there's optimizations that are possible. In some places, it's just not possible. In a classic enterprise, and this is a conversation I'd had yesterday in a session. In a classic enterprise, changing that last leg of this equation, which is the security conversation, it's very hard. And selfish plug, that's what we do, so we simplify that. But everything else in that process perhaps can be optimized. Like, just the QA process can be optimized. I think, and a lot of companies are doing that. I mean, Equinix is a good example of a company. They've done a great job with all these old tools where they've built these layers around them where you can actually move very, very fast. I think, end of the day, the question is this: why does that company care? Why do they need to do this? The reason why is that if they do not, they have a business problem. And I think, end of the day, a lot of people say we want to be a DevOps shop, but why? What is the need, right? You must have a business issue. Right? As a bank selling a mortgage application, do you really need to be a DevOps shop? I don't know. I mean, you tell me. I don't know. But that's the question, right? I mean, we have to be. And I think that's what it is. And speaking to other kinds of software, I mean, you asked about looking for people. One of the things we look for is, so we are not using packaged software, we're building stuff. So as one example, maybe this is something for you to think about. You come up with a problem. Let's say, I don't know, publisher-subscriber kind of models in software. You can build it, or you can use Redis. Okay? So if the answer is that I'm going to go build it, it's not going to work anymore. If the answer is I'm going to use Redis, I don't know if does anybody here know what Redis is? Just show of hands, Redis? Couple. Great, some people. Right, so these are tools, right? So I think what's happened now is applications are built using loosely coupled APIs. You can take a bunch of things that are open source and you can kind of cobble together things, and over time you can scale them well. I think that's another thing that you have to think about. DevOps is all about loosely coupled applications, and even the design of the application, it lends itself well to fast. Everything needs to be fast. And it kind of sounds dumb, but that's what it is. I mean, if you don't have that mentality, you don't fit, plus, the organization doesn't work.
Now, this is really interesting because you've talked about changing processes and you brought up some of the technologies that you're interested in. Now, Talibor, I'd like to send this back at you because I know you've got big enterprise customers and you started out by saying people are most important.
Yeah.
Can you change culture, which is the people side? Can you change that through changing process? Can you change culture by applying technology?
Look, I think people start at different points. So I think the answer is yes. I think obviously you want people to be collaborative and working together, and it certainly makes it easier. But the reality is, when we're talking about, I think this is a good example, right? Because we're talking about how do we do it in a portfolio approach. An organization or an enterprise where you've got 2,000, 4,000 applications running slightly differently, you need to look at those applications and those teams from a risk-based perspective. And you're not just recruiting for one team. You've inherited a bunch of people, so you need to then define the process and the training to change that. So it's not as if you've inherited a division, you're trying to do things better and faster. You can't clear the team. The team's there. How do you put process in? How do you put tooling in to make those people work in the optimal way? So when you're looking at your portfolio within the enterprise and you've got your SAP, you've got your Oracle financials, and you've got your mobile team, what we're seeing a lot of is, 3 years ago it was, let's do a big investment in the ITIL and the ITSM. That's going to create the barrier. That's going to create a defensive environment. We're going to have stability. The answer is that's great for a particular class of application. So you need to tier that out and have customized value streams for each of the different applications. So I guess, initially look at the risk profile of the application, look at the nature of the team, and then spread that out and apply the appropriate process for that team. You're not going to be able to apply the same people and process to an Oracle Financials as you are to the mobile music application. So it's about tailoring that, and you will, in an enterprise, inherit a team. As a startup, you choose your people and you pick the right people for the job, but if you're in that organisation, you've got the people, you need to build those people, work with them, train them, enhance them, do that through process, and the tooling, I guess, provides the underlying mechanism and the enforcement of that by automating some of the underlying process.
I think you made a great point, and I would add one thing to that, in that, as you're making this decision, you've got your division. You're exactly right. The people that know the existing applications, they understand that you can't swap this out. What you need to do, though, is you somehow have to find wins. I mean, the problem with, I think, most DevOps projects I've seen struggle is that they do try to take a whole team and reshuffle all the decks in the cards in the deck and implement. And it almost universally it creates a lot of confusion and usually some pretty significant slowdown in how things operate. So, what I would certainly recommend and have seen work much better is, in that division or in that group or wherever it is, as you prioritize, find a few wins. Get those early wins. Find some teams that are excited about DevOps. Find the people that are that aren't intimidated by the new technology, that are asking you about, hey, why aren't we using Redis? Or why aren't we using, new types of pipeline management tools? What about this Docker stuff? Let's start using these things. What about cloud? Those are the people who want to turn your organization into a herd of unicorns, and give them some leeway. Let them lead from the bottom, because I don't think you can mandate DevOps. It has to come, it has to be a collaboration between management and the teams.
I'm stealing that term, by the way, herd of unicorns. I love it. Now, this is some of the things that can go wrong. And I know, some of the organisations that I've worked with, they'll implement a tool, a piece of technology, and think they've done DevOps. And of course, that's very dangerous. There's actually an interesting thing in human psychology, whereby if you claim to have finished something, you actually get endorphins like you actually finished it. So I'm going to lose 40 pounds. If you go around telling all your friends you're going to lose 40 pounds, you get actually an endorphin hit that you've done something, when you actually haven't done anything. And this I find, especially when people implement technology, they'll put a tool in and they go, great, I've done DevOps. And that's a real problem. I mean, I see, what other problems have you seen when people are focusing in the wrong ways? Maybe their processes are fine, but they put in technology, or their people don't know what DevOps is, but they change up their process. When you focus your attention, your resources in the wrong way, what sort of impacts do you think?
So I'll give you our example. When we started, at least I, for one, was not a DevOps person. My idea of DevOps before we started this company was, well, I guess you need a Jira, and you need a Jenkins, and you need a Confluence, and I think you're a DevOps shop, right? That sounds pretty good. But that's obviously not what it is. It's a mentality shift, and I think, at least for me, that was quite the jarring wake up, that, hey, we need to kind of really think about what the processes should be, how people should be approaching this. And one big kind of phase shift in my mind that happened for me about a year plus ago now is we spent a lot of time developing some stuff, and actually, let me take a step back. So here's the question I was asking myself: where does DevOps fit? And by the way, our example is a very specific example because we're a startup. But is DevOps a team that sits outside of the dev organization, and then there's a separate ops organization, or is it something different? So day one, what we tried was the following. We had a dev team, which would write some code, and then we had essentially a guy at the time who was our DevOps guy, and he would do some things with it. At this point, I don't understand what, and then we had an ops team. It was a terrible plan. Because we hadn't really thought about the process. I mean, you can have the tools, but you have to use the tools in the right fashion. And when we did our alpha, and you show it to some customers, and obviously they say, well, all these things are broken, and try to fix them, and obviously our process broke. So this is where I learned that DevOps, it's a mantra, right? So it needs to fit somewhere within an organization. So who are the people, like you were saying, who are the people who need to be the DevOps people? Turned out for us, the infrastructure team was our DevOps team. So our product, is a bunch of different features, and one piece of that infrastructure product is infrastructure. Our infrastructure team, if they don't think like DevOps guys, we can't make progress. So there's no DevOps team in our company anymore. Our product team, our dev team, the few guys, the 5 guys who work on infrastructure, they are DevOps guys. And that to me was, I mean, now it just makes so much sense because they're the ones writing the code, they're the ones who are building the tools, they're the one building the monitoring because they know the stuff. They built it, so it makes most sense for them to do that. Now, I'm not saying you should go start building monitoring tools, but the point is that there are certain points in this cycle of delivering products where there's this one small subset of guys or gals who are the right people to be really pushing this message in both directions, the dev direction as well as the ops direction. And once we kind of realize that, I mean, now we can move so much faster because of that. Because those guys are the ones who own it. They own the process. And I think that for us was, as one very microcosm example, was the big change.
Interesting. We have a few minutes for questions from the audience. Now, I have still a boatload of questions, so if you don't have any, believe me, I can fill time. But do we have any questions for the panel? Yes, we have one up the back. You can sing out, and I'll repeat your question for the microphone and everything.
Where do you see the business as within DevOps cycle?
Yeah, what do you mean? Where do you see the business? What do you mean by the business?
Well, what I mean by that is that IT DevOps is a very important business. And when you talk about people, wouldn't it be best also to have the business actually with the process?
This is a great question. So the question was, where does the business sit? If IT is there to serve the business, and IT does DevOps, how does the business fit into this? Wouldn't it make more sense to have the business part of that process? One thing that I say quite a lot is DevOps doesn't start with dev and doesn't end with ops. I actually talk a little bit about the PMO in DevOps. I mean, Dalibor, maybe you can jump on this one.
Yeah, so we don't actually call it DevOps. I know we won the Gartner Award in IT DevOps last year, but we don't actually call it DevOps. We look at it as a value stream to say you're trying to deliver an outcome which is accelerated time to value and software delivered faster to customers, and you're trying to do that at higher quality. So when you're looking at how you do that, you look at the people, process and tool and try to find the optimal mix of that. And that means you're looking all the way from what are the initiatives that we're running in the PMO, even though that's the dirty word, to how we actually deploy that into a service management tool like ServiceNow or Remedy, which is on the back end in most enterprises. So you need to look at that entire value stream and look at that value stream across what does that mean for my tier 1 core banking application, which might be a heavily governed process with lots of involvement from lots of people, and you need to collaborate along that, all the way down to what's the lightweight process for the mobile application. So, but it is from inception, initiative, all the way through. That's the way we define it, and that's the sort of customer base that we work with.
Any
So
other
you got the
thoughts?
Australian to answer the first question.
I must have.
How did that happen?
Thank you for having a good accent. It's reassuring to me. I'm happy about that. I mean, any other thoughts on that question?
I think it's I think it's interesting because when we first start seeing DevOps projects spring up in larger companies, they did predominantly come from very niche parts like the web team, or maybe somebody was doing the website and was trying to do this. But I think the idea of the business being involved is actually pretty new. I mean, I really see that as something that's emerged in the last 2 to 3 years, where the business is kind of learning that this stuff is possible. I mean, it's amazing to me. But I'm hearing people that are maybe they're not really product managers. They're like application outcome owners, and they're coming back saying, look, I know there's a better way to do this. When you tell me it's going to take us 9 months to prepare this feature, I refuse to accept it. And I think that's fantastic, right? I think that if the business puts the pressure on IT and puts IT in the position to meet the goals of the business, then IT modernizes, IT moves toward these new places. And I think when you go back to finding those first unicorns, the business should be giving you all the direction in the world. They will tell you who the unicorn is. You don't have to figure it out for yourself. It's usually pretty darn obvious.
Any other questions? Yes, we have one here.
What's the biggest barrier, cultural, people-wise, to adopting DevOps?
So just repeat the question. What's the biggest barrier, people, cultural-wise, to adopting DevOps?
Yeah, it's risk, right? I mean, it's personal risk. It's people don't want to take that accountability. I mean, right now, what is the alternative to DevOps? The way we do things now, it's siloed. We have a lot of barriers. I did my job well, and I shouldn't be blamed for whatever the bad outcome is. So I don't want DevOps because now, the three of us up here, we own the outcome of X. And if X doesn't happen, I can't blame you, and I can't blame you. I've got to blame, we have to own that outcome. So people I've seen it over and over again. They're reluctant to take that. They don't want to own that risk. They like very much the process-driven model. I mean, ITIL, it didn't come about for no reason. And I think of ITIL as being the opposite of DevOps. ITIL is about deep-seated processes with deep sets of controls, and it works, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. It works to make applications stable and not change very often. Just doesn't work if you want to innovate quickly and please your customers.
We'll have a discussion about that offline. There was another question, I think, just here.
Yes, with an Australian accent as well.
Oh, wow.
Fantastic.
So do you see IT security as potentially being able to move faster and take some of the DevOps principles like automation, like sharing and cooperation, and accelerate the cycle that we typically see as a drag?
So the question there, do you see security as being able to enable speed and agility in a DevOps mode? That's a great, and I see this has got to be for you.
Yeah.
So yes. The interesting thing is there's this new concept called SecOps, security operations, and the idea is that we should move faster. So speaking of ITIL, I mean there are CISOs I've spoken to in the last 2 years who said to me, why do we want to move fast? I mean, what is the purpose of moving fast? We're doing just fine. And then you talk to the app teams, and they feel like everything is so slow. So I think a lot of organizations are recognizing that security is a problem a lot of times. And what we've seen in the last 2 years is, in many cases, app teams, DevOps organizations, because security is such a pain, they ignore security and they go do something on their own in the cloud. And if you see that happen in an organization, that's an organization that's going to move faster on security very soon. Because the security team recognizes that if that keeps happening, I'm out of a job. Because I have no power anymore. And I think, and this may be just a Silicon Valley thing, but this is what I see a lot now. The minute IT, or not IT, but dev or DevOps kind of go around, just kind of do something on their own in the public cloud without telling anybody sometimes, that's when the security guys wake up and say, oh my God, this is a problem for me, I need to fix it. And that's a good thing. Usually security, the reason why it's slow, and you're exactly right, the problem is automation. Right? They have no damn automation. They monitor the rest of the world, they don't monitor anything they do. Right? I mean, there are companies, big companies, who still do startup configs, they take startup configs from the routers, and they check into CVS. And that's their control. What are you doing? Right? So there are better ways to solve these problems now, and a lot of security organizations are recognizing that, and even here in New York and a lot of these banks, security guys are waking up to this concept of SecOps. And I think in a few years, because of what's happening in DevOps, I think in a few years you're going to see some massive shifts in how security is done in most enterprises.
And just one quick analogy that I've heard, and it's not mine, I don't take credit for it, but the idea that brakes make you go slower, right? In actual fact, security we think of as a brake, and it holds us back. But in actual fact, brakes let you go faster. If we didn't have any brakes on a sports car, then it would be out of control. But brakes let you go faster, knowing that you have the control to slow down and stop. And I see security in a lot of ways the same way. When it's done right, it enables you to go faster, and I like that. Are there any other Australians in the audience want to ask a question? Well, we have time. Well, we just have time for one more question.
So a quick point and then a question. I thought Java EE and .NET were the new COBOL.
And nothing is the new COBOL. I wrote a blog a while ago, your favorite technology will not kill anything. Your question, please.
My question is that how do you see DBAs, database administrators, and the data guys and gals?
That's a great question. How do you see DBAs fitting into the DevOps approach?
So look, we have tons of Postgres and we have a Cassandra backend. We have tons of places where we collect data. There are other guys in the team or gals in the team who've taken on that role. And what's happened is, so we use enough kind of Python-based tools that kind of abstract the classic problems. Like, nobody in our company needs to understand what ODBC is or JDBC is, for that matter. But that does not mean that the role is the job is gone. It's just that the tool is different. Right, so as one example, there's if you're familiar with Python, has this framework called Django. Django is a really nice library where you can use it to basically make it sit on top of Postgres or any other database, and then you can rely on it for anything from joins to whatever you want it to do. All migrations can be taken care of that layer, so you don't need to understand how the ODBC layer works, as one example, or you don't need to ever do a join. Right? Makes life simpler. Problem doesn't go away. It's still there. It's just that the tool is different. So I think certainly in our company, I would say that instead of having 1 or 2 dedicated DBAs, 6 or 7 people end up doing the DBA responsibility. It's just that they use different tools. But you cannot get rid of this problem, right? Of course, if anything, there is more data to manage now than before.
Okay, I think that's pretty much all we have time for. Just ask Dalibor, any last comments, final thoughts?
Look, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think it's definitely around people, process, and tooling. People first, make sure you've got the right team, but you can't always replace them. The process, make it flexible enough for the risk profile, so consider risk and the external factors as well, not just how do we do it at the lowest engineering level. And if you're struggling with orchestration, collaboration at the enterprise level, come and talk to us, Plutora.com.
Super. Shannon, any final thoughts?
No, I think it's been great. I mean, I really like I think that as companies are adopting DevOps and going through this process, there's, we're kind of starting the journey. I mean, I don't think you should feel pressure that you need to be doing this stuff already and it need to be very far along. You'll come out and you'll hear us talking about pipelines and containers and Jenkins and ChatOps and Slack and these things, and it kind of becomes overwhelming. But I would say, as you're thinking of where to start, start with communication. You were talking about how Slack is such an important. As another startup, just the amount of our life that is spent and communication is spent in chat now and in things like Slack, so that we can understand what's a problem, what's happening, and work together to solve it. It really is changing things. I mean, both from interperson communication, but also intersystem communication. I get chats from our Jenkins system telling me a new build is available that I can go out and test. And, putting in place tools can be pretty empowering. So I do think there's a really important rule for that. And once you've got those in place, people can start to cross these barriers that just naturally have been there for a long time.
Great. And Haseeb?
Given that we're 8 minutes over, I'll say I agree with everything you said. Check out our website, soha.io. SecOps is what we do. If we can help in any way, more than happy to.
Fantastic. So that's all we have time for. My name again is Andy Mann for the DevOps Summit, the Cloud Expo, and the range of other things that are on show here today. Don't forget, come back tomorrow, some fantastic keynote content. Check out my website, sageable.com. Thank you all for attending. We'll see you next time.